And now we can take a look at generating some proxy pieces for our fractured geometry. If we do an exploded view on our fractured geometry here, you can see that some of these pieces are fairly high resolution. And when we do a rigid body sim, typically we want to simulate convex objects. The bullet solver can do some concave collisions, but it's much slower than working with convex geometry, so you typically want to deal with convex shapes as much as possible when doing a bullet sim. And this is the default behavior of Bullet. It expects that your input will be treated as convex hull objects. And to help explain what I mean here, let me delete one of these pieces. I'll delete based on the name prim attribute, and let's select something that has kind of an interesting shape to it. I suppose this one right here works just fine. I'll flip that to delete non-selected. So what this means when I say that Bullet wants to treat objects as convex hulls is that it wants to just create a shape around this geometry without any recesses in it like this. And you can see what the default convex hull shape would look like if you drop in a shrink wrap and display that. Actually, we can't do a shrink wrap based on packed geometry, so we need to unpack this piece just before we do that shrink wrap. So this gives us a rough idea of what the convex hull collision geometry would look like for this piece of complicated fracture geometry. So with the fracture displayed, we can template display our shrink wrap, and you can see that the collisions for this won't be very accurate. And to be honest, this isn't always a problem. You don't necessarily need perfectly accurate collisions in Bullet for your simulation to look good. If you have a chaotic destruction sim and it's doing this rough approximation for the collision shapes, there's a good chance that it'll still look nice. But sometimes when you get a better look at the geometry and can see what the collisions are doing more clearly, sometimes this won't cut it. But luckily we have some tools that can give us better collision shapes that will allow us to get more accurate collision results, and we can kind of control the level of accuracy of these colliders to the actual fractured high-res geometry. And this can improve our collisions while also giving us some more lightweight geometry for visualizing things in the viewport, or perhaps doing preview flipbooks or renders without displaying all of the super high-res geometry. So to create these proxies, let's just delete this shrink wrap here, and instead drop in a convex decomposition, connect that to the unpack, and by default, the convex decompose will decompose each piece individually based on this piece attribute here, which defaults to name, which is what we want. And we have this max concavity control to control how closely we want these proxies to represent the original shape. So let's display that convex decompose, and right now this doesn't look much different than our shrink wrap. It's actually pretty much identical between that convex decompose and the shrink wrap here, but as we start to lower this max concavity, then we start to see a better approximation of that shape. See, 0.5 is doing a much better job, 0.3 is even more accurate, and to test the accuracy of the decomposition, let's display the fractured piece, template display our convex decomposed object, and this proxy is quite accurate. However, we do have several thousand pieces of fractured geometry here, and the more we raise the accuracy of our decomposed proxies, the heavier this will get both simulation-wise and general geometry-wise for display and etc. So it's a good idea to not try to push this accuracy any higher than you really need. So in this case, I'm going to go with a value of 0.7 because this gives us a better approximation than just the basic shrink wrap convex hull does. It does conform to those recessed shapes a whole lot better, and it still remains quite low resolution, so it should be pretty efficient for us to simulate and display in the viewport. And just comparing the heaviness of these meshes, our fracture geometry here has over 2,000 polygons, and the proxy piece only has 646. So this looks like a pretty good value, and I'm going to go ahead and apply this to the entire set of fractured geometry. So I'll disconnect the unpack here, and then I'm going to connect that unpack to our full set of fractured geometry, and sometimes this can be a little bit slow for it to calculate the proxies for all of these pieces. And in this case, it was actually pretty fast. I didn't have to wait very long at all for that convex decompose to calculate. Everything looks about right, although we are seeing a handful of unconnected points, which is a little bit of a red flag. Let's try just cleaning those up. And on this clean, I'm going to make sure to turn off remove degenerate primitives. We only want to remove unused points. And let's double check the number of unique name values in our proxy output here to make sure that we didn't lose any pieces through this decomposition and cleanup there. So after the clean, we have 6,594 unique name attribute values. And then checking our fracture optimized, we have 6,594 unique values for the names there as well. So it looks like we're all good. We didn't lose any name values or pieces through this proxy generation process. So let's go ahead and once again assemble our geometry. Turn off the create name attribute, turn on create packed geometry. And the convex decomposed geometry does still have the area and inside only attributes that we had previously promoted to the packed objects on our main fracture. So we might as well do it on the proxies as well. I'll transfer area, transfer inside only, and our proxies look all ready to go. So I'll create a null for those, call that proxies, connect that to the third input of our RBD pack here. And now after repacking this with our optimized fracture, optimized constraints, and proxies, we can once again cache this out. I'll create a file cache called destruction with proxies. As usual, this is just a single static frame, so make sure it's set to save current frame, load from disk is turned on, and then we can save this to disk. Now if we display this RBD packed result, we're only going to see the fractured geometry. The constraints and proxies are hidden in the viewport, but they do still exist in there even though you can't see them. And since we're all done with our fracture, let's drop in a null that we can use to bring this into our simulation that we're going to set up. So I'll just call this null out fracture, and then we can move on to setting up the simulation for this.